I went back through 50 sales calls from consultants, and it was painful to listen to deals that should have closed but didn't. Even worse, most of them repeated the same mistakes over and over, and millions of dollars were left on the table. If you're new to this channel, welcome, I'm Ferris. I've sold north of $70 million in consulting in my own career and sold an 8-figure consulting company to a global media giant. So I've watched tons of approaches to sales, but these are the 4 that keep killing winnable deals before the proposal even gets sent. And what is scary about them is that none of them feel like mistakes while you're in it. Everything seems totally normal right up until the buyer suddenly goes silent. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly where you're losing deals so you can turn your own close rate around. Every sales call has 2 conversations happening at the same time. The one you hear and the one happening inside the buyer's head. And that second conversation is usually the one deciding the deal. While you're talking, the buyer is quietly evaluating risk, budget, timing, and whether you're the safest choice. And that's why so many calls feel great right up until the buyer disappears. The 4 mistakes in this video all happen inside that hidden conversation. The good news is these mistakes are fixable. Once you learn to spot them, you can stop losing deals before the buyer quietly checks out. Let's step on the mat. Mistake number 1, over-talking the buyer. There's a really odd pattern that shows up the moment you start watching recordings of lost deals. As soon as the buyer got quieter, the consultant started talking more explaining, more pitching, more reassurance. The best consultants didn't do that. Their calls stayed balanced whether they won or lost the deal. But weaker sales calls usually drifted into monologues because the consultant felt the energy change and tried to recover the call by filling the silence. That almost never works. Buyers often go quiet because they're thinking about risk, budget concerns, or implementation questions. They don't always need more information. They need space to process. So when you catch yourself adding just one more point or just one more example, stop and ask a question instead. What concerns are coming up on your side? What is your reaction so far? That small shift changes the entire dynamic. Confident consultants don't rush to fill silence. They use it to understand what's actually happening in the buyer's head. And the data backs this up. Gong, the company that has analyzed millions of sales calls, found that top performers spend more time listening than talking, averaging a 43 to 57 talk to listen ratio. So when you feel a call is starting to drift, don't add more information. Ask what the buyer is thinking. But the next mistake doesn't show up because you're talking too much. It shows up because of what you're choosing to talk about, and it tends to land before you've even noticed you've made it. Mistake number 2, solving too early. This usually happens around minute 8 of a 45-minute call. The buyer finishes explaining their situation and you feel the urge to start solving the problem. This is actually the move that separates the consultants who consistently win complex deals from the ones who keep getting ghosted. And it shows up in basically the same spot every single time. The buyer wraps up describing their situation. You feel that familiar pull to start being useful, and the words, "Here's how I'd approach this," come out of your mouth way too early. Now, here's something that should genuinely change how you run your next 10 calls. Problem-focused sellers, meaning the ones who keep digging into the problem before they offer anything, close roughly 30% more effectively than solution-focused sellers. I get it. You jump to the solution because it feels professional, like you're proving you actually know what you're doing. The play isn't to avoid talking about your service. It is to delay talking about your service until you're past the point in the discussion where you've actually earned the right to. How do you know when you reach that point? Use this 3-layer diagnostic. Layer 1 is the problem they're describing. Layer 2 is what they've already tried, why it failed, and how much it cost them. And layer 3 is what's at stake, personally and organizationally, if nothing changes. Now, don't ask too explicitly. You could come off as intrusive. Ask open-ended questions like, is there any kind of internal friction that you're looking for this solution to smooth out? This is the open door for buyers to share about things like career risk, board pressure, or missed targets. Until you've gotten past layer 3, anything you put on the table is going to feel like a pitch dressed up as a solution. But the second you get there, the buyer will feel heard and understood, and they'll be much more receptive to your recommendations because you're probably literally the only person in their world who's bothered to look that deep. By the way, I put together a free sales call audit checklist that takes all 4 of these mistakes and turns them into yes or no questions that you can run against any call you've recently won or lost, so you can see exactly which ones are running in your own pipeline right now. Link is in the description. Go ahead and grab it before we keep going. Mistake number 3, hidden stakeholders. Because this trap doesn't happen during the call, it happens because of who isn't on the call. You probably treat the person on the call as the decision maker, even when somewhere inside, you kind of know they can't actually sign the contract on their own. And it's mostly emotional. The call went well, the energy was great, the champion is excited, and asking who else needs to approve this feels like it might break the moment, so you skip it. Then 6 weeks of silence later, you find out that the deal died inside a procurement review you never even knew was happening. Gartner ran a survey on B2B enterprise buying teams, and the average number of people involved in a B2B buying decision is sitting north of 10 people. And on bigger deals, it is stretching closer to 20. Now, if you're selling to small and medium-sized businesses, the number will be smaller, but the same principle applies here. Your main point of contact is almost never the only one who's involved in the buying decisions. So when one excited manager tells you yes, that's literally somewhere between 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 votes. They're going to be asked cold-blooded questions about risk, about ROI, about alternative vendors, and you're not going to be in the room to answer them. The fix isn't to bypass your champion and try to get to those people directly. That almost always blows up in your face. The fix is to build what I call a champion enablement pack and send it to your champion the same day the call wraps. It's a 1-page brief written for each typical stakeholder. So finance gets the ROI math and the cost of inaction spelled out. Operations gets the implementation timeline and the resource ask. Legal gets the risk profile and what your contract is actually going to look like. Each one is short, written so your champion can forward it as their own argument, not yours. And from there, your champion stops being the lone advocate and starts being the most prepared person inside every internal meeting you're not invited to. And the second you've armed your champion this way, you stop being just some vendor they happen to pick, and you start being a partner they're actively defending in every room you can't physically walk into. But arming your champion only buys you so much, because what happens after the call ends is what actually decides whether momentum holds together or quietly evaporates. Mistake number 4, weak next steps. Watch the last few minutes of most consultant sales calls and you'll see the same forgettable pattern. With one person saying, I'll send a proposal over next week, and then the buyer saying, that sounds great. And then both sides hanging up, assuming the deal is somehow moving forward. Here's the brutal number killing your close rate. B2B deals need up to 12 follow-up touches before they actually close, and yet about half of all sellers just give up after the first one. A week of silence in B2B is enough to let momentum quietly die on its own, and roughly 4 out of 10 winnable opportunities get lost just because nobody pushed the thing forward. The fix is something I'd call the in-call action plan, and it has to happen in the last 5 minutes of the call before anyone says goodbye. Instead of leaving the call with vague next steps, you co-build a small shared document right there with the buyer in real time. You ask them, given everything we just talked about, what would actually make sense as the next 3 things that need to happen to move this forward? When should those things happen by? And who else needs to be involved on their end? This is sometimes called a mutual action plan in enterprise sales. From there, follow-ups stop feeling like nudges and start feeling like progress check-ins on something both you and the buyer actually committed to. The first time you run an action plan during the last 5 minutes of a call, you'll notice the conversation shift. Suddenly, you're no longer hoping the deal moves forward, you're managing a process both you and the buyer have agreed to. And make sure to keep following up with the buyer even after you've reached the last step of the follow-up plan that you agreed on at the end of the sales call. In sales, what pays is persistence. Now you know the 4 mistakes that quietly kill consulting deals during sales calls and client meetings. If there's one takeaway from this video, it is that most consulting deals don't die from a single mistake. They die from small breakdowns in trust, clarity, and momentum, and all of that compounds over time throughout the sales process, especially at the proposal stage. So watch my next video on writing winning consulting proposals, because that's where a lot of consultants lose deals without even realizing it.